I'm finally doing it. I'm going to talk about a series that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is the Court of Thorns and Roses series. I did finish the whole series a while ago, and I recently reread the first book for the first time in about 2 years. And so now that I've read it twice, I'm ready to give my full thoughts and review of the book. So if you are unfamiliar, Court of Thorns and Roses is a very, very popular fantasy series by an author named Sarah J. Maas. She has also written the Throne of Glass series and the Crescent City series, so she's a very successful fantasy writer. This book in particular, the first of 5 in this series, is 416 pages long, so not the longest book ever. The second and third and fifth books in this series are thick. It was published in 2015, and it currently has a 4.20 on Goodreads, which is really, really high. Now, I'm not a big fantasy reader myself, but I'm going to talk about why, if you're not a fantasy reader like me, I read a lot of mysteries, a lot of historical fiction, just kind of everything but fantasy. This is a great book if you want to dip your toe in the waters of fantasy, because it is about fairies. That might not sound interesting to you, but I really, really enjoyed this series. Is it going to win any awards for literature or the best writing ever? No. But it is very entertaining, and if you're looking for fun, quick reads and you're interested in trying the series, this is my thoughts on it. Specifically the very first book, which is this one. So, getting right into it, the author, Maas, started writing this book when she was really young, and I don't think The Hunger Games had either hadn't come out yet or it wasn't huge yet. And so the beginning of this book is very similar to The Hunger Games, but as far as I can tell, she actually wrote it before Hunger Games came out, so I don't think it was inspired by that at all. But anyway, the main character's name is Feyre, and she lives in a village with her 2 older sisters and her father, and they are very, very poor, to the point where Feyre has to go bow hunting in the woods in order for them to survive. And so the beginning is very similar to Hunger Games, where, poor family, sister has to hunt with a bow to get meat for the family to eat. One day Feyre's out hunting in the woods, and this is how the book opens. She's hunting in the woods, and she sees this huge wolf, and she kind of goes back and forth whether or not she wants to kill it, and she does. And she skins it and goes to the village with her sisters and sells the hide for money. This merchant in the village gives her a lot more money than it's worth, and kind of gives her this warning about going into the woods, because Feyre's village, and Feyre's a human, Feyre's village is located on the bottom of this big island called Prythian. So the mortal lands basically are down here. It's a tiny little southern section of the island of Prythian, and then everything north of the wall, which separates the humans from the fairies, is called Prythian, and it has different courts in it. The first book mainly takes place in the human realm and the Spring Court, and then over here we have the continent, which they basically never talk about, and then we have Highburn, the little island right here. So anyway, for context, Feyre's family lives in the mortal lands just south of the wall. And so this lady in the village that she sells her hide to gives her this warning about being careful in the woods, and there's fairies and whatever. So in this world, humans are terrified of fairies. They hate them. They think they're horrible because fairies are very powerful. 500 years ago, there was this huge war and a bunch of people died, and this treaty was signed, and now there's a big wall separating the humans from the fairies. And anyway, humans have this huge fear and dislike of fairies. Later that night, Feyre is in her cottage with her family, and this beast breaks in and demands to know who killed the wolf. And this is how the beast is described. The beast had to be as large as a horse, and while his body was somewhat feline, his head was distinctly wolfish. I didn't know what to make of the curled elk-like horns that protruded from his head, but lion or hound or elk, there was no doubting the damage his black dagger-like claws and yellow fangs would inflict. And so when Feyre admits that she's the one that killed the wolf, the beast tells her that was a fairy in disguise. And based on this treaty that was signed when the wall was put up, and this is what he says: a life for a life, any unprovoked attacks on fairy kind by humans are to be paid only by a human life in exchange. So Feyre accidentally killed a fairy. The punishment for that is a life for a life. the beast says, either I kill you now, or you come live with me in Prithian for the rest of your life. And Feyre doesn't know which is worse, because to humans, living in the fairy world, they don't know what it's like. It could be dangerous, it could be deadly, it could be horrible, she might get tortured, but her family begs her, like, please go with him, you know, don't let him kill you right here in front of us and everything. So the beast takes Feyre with him across the wall to what we know is the Spring Court, which is the southernmost like chunk of that big island where all the fairies live. So the first little tiny chunk of this book reminds me of the Hunger Games. The big middle part is very similar to Beauty and the Beast, and I think Maas has come out in interviews and said that this is kind of like it was very much inspired by Beauty and the Beast, because Feyre is basically taken prisoner by this big beast thing, and when they arrive at the Spring Court where this fairy lives, it's not at all what she expected. It's beautiful. It's spring year-round. This guy lives in like a huge, beautiful manor, and as soon as they arrive to his estate, he shifts from his beast form into his fairy form, which is basically a human. So when they talk about fairies, they're not like fairies. It's like a human-sized man, and he has pointy ears. So the next several chapters are just about Feyre adjusting to life in this world that she thought her whole life was dangerous and horrible and horrendous, and it turns out it's pretty nice. These fairies have a lot of powers, and Tamlin turns out is a High Lord, which means he's kind of like the prince of the Spring Court, or like the king, or he's in charge of the Spring Court basically, so he's kind of an important dude. And she's like, okay, well, you're keeping me here prisoner. Do you want me to clean? Like, what's my role here? And he's basically like, I don't care what you do. In Beauty and the Beast, Belle likes to read. Well, Feyre's illiterate because her family never bothered to educate her. So instead of reading, she's really into painting. And that's kind of an annoying thing that comes up a lot in this book, is she's always talking about painting and painting and painting and whatever. So she spends her days kind of getting to know the land and the servants that work in the manor and learning how to paint. And of course, she and Tamlin develop a little bit of a romance, and it's very sweet. And there's something evil happening in Prithian. Tamlin refers to it as a blight, but it's kind of like a disease or a sickness or something that's like encroaching on his lands, and it's sucking away his powers. And some bad stuff really goes down, and Feyre basically gets booted back to the human realms because she and Tamlin, like I said, have developed feelings for each other, and he knows that the only way she can be safe is to get her out of the fairy world. So even though the treaty says a life for a life, he says screw the treaty, he sends her back home. I don't want to spoil the ending because the ending is wild. It's kind of the best part of the whole book, but we figure out what has been causing this sickness, and it turns out Feyre actually plays a really, really pivotal role in curing it, and she didn't know it. And again, very reminiscent of Beauty and the Beast, where, you know, in Beauty and the Beast, he has to make a human fall in love with him before the last rose petal falls or something like that. There's a very similar thing going on in this book, and I won't spoil it. It's not a rose, but it's something else that Feyre needs to do in a specific amount of time in order for this blight to be lifted from the fairy realms. That's basically what the very first book in this series is about. It's a very quick read. I think the pace is perfect because Feyre and Tamlin go from disliking each other to being kind of friends to realizing they want to be more than friends, and it's like you're never bored. There's never a dull moment in this book, and it's because it's the first book in a series of 5. There's a lot of world building, so there's a lot of introducing us to different creatures that live in the fairy world, introducing us to other high lords of the other courts. And there's a character named Rhysand that Sarah J. Maas just does a hilarious job of describing him. He's kind of a jerk, and he shows up a lot toward the end of the book. What's so great, I think, about this series is after I read this book, I couldn't wait to find out what was going to happen next. And the second book is a totally, like, a complete 180 from this one. And it's something that, like, I want to talk about it, but I don't want to spoil it. Rereading it the second time, I can totally see it coming because I know what happens in the next 4 books. But the first time around, when I read this one and then read the second one, I was blown away because did not see that little switcheroo coming at all. If you're looking for something a little different, a little romantic, it is fantasy, but it's not like crazy. They're kind of just, I mean, they're called fairies, which makes you think like maybe that's a little nerdy, but it's not. They're people who have pointy ears and like powers. That's about it. So maybe I will review the rest of the series eventually, but I do not want to spoil the whole series by talking about it. But if you are looking for something different, I highly recommend giving A Court of Thorns and Roses a chance. This book is such a fun read, and the whole series really is cool. And I think Maas is writing more books because the 5th one kind of ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger. So also, it is becoming a show on Hulu. I know they're working on it. I have no idea when it's going to come out. Court of Thorns and Roses, it's a crazy popular series. I liked it. So there you go.